Welcome to the 21st chapter of the book of Acts. We're continuing with Paul's third journey. He's in Miletus. We'll go to the map here and open the map, and we'll show you where he's at. Here, he's in Miletus, and he's called the elders from Ephesus to come down. And they have come down, and he is spoken to them, and then he will go on the voyage back to Jerusalem by coast, which is an island here, and then by roads, in between Rhodes and the mainland, over to Patara, however it is pronounced. We'll go into the Greek and we'll find out how they pronounced it. And then they went a long way past Cyprus, it mentions, over to Tyre, where he spent a few days, and then down to Ptolemais, where he spent a day, down to Caesarea, and then finally down here into Jerusalem. So we will begin then in verse 1, and it starts, and when it came to pass, we embarked, having drawn away from them, having run direct, we came unto Kos, having run direct. I used to have a sailboat, and I sailed for many years, so I know some of these nautical terms. Nice that I can use them. At the time, my last thing in my mind was I would ever translate a Bible. And but it's interesting how God uses things that we have done in ways that we don't know. And here, running direct means that the wind is behind you. Your sail is flat out to catch as much wind as it can behind the boat, from the stern of the boat, and it's blowing towards the prow, and they're running. And it's a very stable way of sailing, not leaning over. And we came unto Kos, and I showed you that island on the map, and the next day unto Rhodes. Apparently they went by the island, and from there unto Patara is the name of that town, and docked there, and then having found a boat, passing by through unto Phoenicia, having set foot upon it, we embarked. So they find another boat that's heading to Phoenicia. That's in what's today Lebanon. And they took off, and Cyprus having appeared, and having left it on the left, so that means that on their left-hand side, they sailed into Syria and led down unto Tyre, the island city at the time. And for that place, the boat was unloading the cargo. And having discovered the disciples, we remained there 7 days, who said to Paul through the Spirit to not ascend into Jerusalem. So they were there for 7 days in Tyre, and these people were disciples. They found them, and they were warning Paul not to go into Jerusalem, just as happened when he was back in Miletus. But when it happened, we accomplished the days. Having gone forth, we went with the women and the children, all escorting us as far as outside the city. And this is the same thing that happened to him earlier. And setting the knees upon the shore, we prayed. Ponton, all. We have the word pandemic, of all the people. Gynexy, gyna, gynecology. Exo and exoderm, the outer layer of the skin. Polios, metropolis. A lot of derivatives are all in our book, English Derivatives of the Greek New Testament, which can be found in our bookstore. And having saluted, weren't in the military, it was just a figure of speech, one another, we mounted into the boat, and those returned to their own. And we, having concluded the voyage from Tyre, arrived at Ptolemais. Ptolemaida is the Greek pronunciation. Ptolemaida. So they took a boat for the short period of time instead of taking it by land. And having saluted the brothers there, we abode one day with them. And the next day, the ones around Paul, having gone forth, they came unto Caesarea. How that doesn't say how they got there, that just doesn't really matter. And so Caesarea is a landing for, it's a port, so they probably took a boat there. Having entered into the house of Philip the evangelist, being from out of the seven, we stayed with him. This is mentioned earlier in Acts in chapter 6 of Philip being chosen of the seven to take care of the things, relieve the work from the 11 disciples. Later in chapter 8 it mentions he went to the road to Azotus and ran across the Ethiopian eunuch and evangelized the Ethiopian eunuch, baptized him, and then was all of a sudden was gone. The eunuch didn't see him, and he was up to, finally made it to Azotus and then up to Caesarea. So this is the Philip that we were reading about earlier, and what happened in the meantime. And to this man were 4 virgin daughters who prophesied. So he got married there apparently and raised a family and had 4 daughters who prophesied. The women prophesied. Now prophecy, in what way, we'll see here, is more or less warning of the future. The future had something to do with, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it can be a condition that they can prophesy about. If you do this or so, and so this is what's going to happen. And of our remaining many days, there came down a certain one from Judea, prophetes. There's a transliteration, the same as up here. Prophetevusei. That's the verb, and here is the noun. By name Agabus. This Agabus is mentioned in Acts 11, 27 and 28, who came from Jerusalem to Antioch and prophesied a worldwide famine during Claudius, I believe, the emperor, Roman emperor. So now here he appears again. And Agabus, and having come to us, and having taken the belt of Paul, and having bound his hands and his feet, he said, the belt, the zoni. A zone is a area around the earth in map making, in geography. The zone, equator is the belt around the center, but then the rest of these different zones and belts are mentioned in geography, and it comes from this Greek word. So he took this belt of Paul that was wrapped around him and bound his hands and feet. Yeah, I suppose he's binding his own. He said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, the man of which is this belt, so shall the Jews bind in Jerusalem and deliver up into the hands of the nations." And this is more or less what the people were warning him in Miletus. And Paul heard these things. The hands and the feet. Podus, we have a tripod, 3-footed object. Pneuma, pneumatics. And he's going to be bound, Agabus said, in Jerusalem and delivered up into the hands of the ethnic, the nations, the Gentiles, and the King James, which is what will happen. And when we heard these things, both we and the ones of that place appealed for him to not ascend unto Jerusalem. And Paul responding said, "Why do you cause weeping and breaking of my heart?" Cardion, the cardiac. "For I not only to be bound, but also readily hold to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." Well, so now here we have prophecy, but yet the person didn't listen to the prophecy, but yet he did what he thought was the right thing. So that leads us to believe that when people can prophesy certain things happening, Do we have to accept what they're saying and do the opposite? No, here Paul didn't. And I think it was a couple of places. So it's an interesting, because most of the time you think of the prophet as giving something for the person to go along with. But here, Paul didn't. And he, not being persuaded, we were still, having said, the will of the Lord, let it be. Yeah, Paul's going to do it, let it be. It's the will of the Lord. Well, does that make the prophecy not the will of the Lord or from the Lord? No, it's interesting that the Revelation has a lot of prophecies and are terrible prophecies and that are going to happen, and yet they are prophecies. And after these days, having packed up, we ascended unto Jerusalem. So now they're walking, apparently packing up and walking all the way down to Jerusalem. And having came together also some of the Mathiton, the disciples, Apo from Caesarea, with us, bringing the one with whom we should lodge, a certain Manassoni. Manasson is actually the name in the nominative. Here it's in the indirect object, a dative. A certain Nason, a Cypriot from the island of Cyprus, a disciple of old. I don't know if it means he's old, or he was a disciple from a long time. I think the second is correct. Archaeology, study of old things. This Manason is only mentioned here, this spot, the Bible. Verse 17, and of our being in Jerusalem, the brothers gladly received us. And the disciples that were there and others. And the following day, Paul enters with us to James, and us as being Luke and others, I guess in Manason. So he enters to James. This is James, the brother of the Lord, wrote the book of James. And all the elders arrived, the Presbyterian, the rule of the elders. And having greeted them, he described according to each one what God did among the ethnici, the nations, through his diakonias, a deacon, through his service. So he's telling them all the things, both with Jews and the nations. And they, having heard, acoustics, having heard, glorified the Lord. They remember the doxa. Whenever you see doxa, it has something to do with glory. And here's the verb, glorified the Lord. The doxology and the liturgy is glory of the Lord. And they said to him, you view, O brother, how many myriads of believing Jews there are, and all being zealous of the law. And they're in Jerusalem. This is the center of Judaism, and they all go along with the law and more things, and they're zealous. When they instruct concerning you, that zelote up here, this is zealous, that's the transliteration. The nomu, astronomy, the nomi, nomu is law. They instruct concerning you that you teach all the Jews among the nations defection from Moses. Well, that's not true, but this is what they're saying. This is where the word has come out about Paul. Didaskis, didactics is teaching. They're saying not to circumcise their children. This is what they're accusing Paul of saying, nor to walk in the customs of the Jews, and peripatetic is a person that walks. What then is it? Assuredly it is necessary for a multitude to come together, for they shall hear that you have come. This then do, what we tell you. It's in the exclamation. You do this, what we tell you. There are with us 4 men having a vow upon themselves. Taking these, be purified with them, and spend for them that they may shave the head. That's the end of the vow. They shave the head. Cephalin, cephalic. It has to do with the head. And all should know that of which they have been instructed concerning you is nothing. So go along with these things of the Jewish law, and people will see you doing that, and they'll know that you are following the law. But you conform to keeping the law even yourself. Know that that you are actually keeping the law. But concerning the ones believing of the nations, the Gentiles, we wrote, judging them to give heed to no such thing. Well, this is very interesting because of the instructions from James. The Gentiles they didn't have to keep these things, but the Jews, apparently, to the early church, they expected the Jews to continue doing these things. But we know in 70 AD the temple was destroyed, so it's pretty much the end of Judaism, has never been rebuilt, and all the sacrifices ceased, and it's pretty difficult to be a Jew in the type of Judaism that they were following when there was no temple sacrifices. So basically most of the Christian Jews assimilated and left the Jewishness, but there were ones that left and stayed in the Jewishness, and we'll see that a little bit later at the end of the chapter. Except to keep themselves from both that sacrifice to idols and the blood and what is strangled in harlotry, that is, the Gentiles or the people, the nations. They are to keep themselves from that sacrifice to idols, blood. Can't eat anything that has blood in it. It has to be cooked. What is strangled, and porneon is a harlotry. Then Paul, having taken the men the next day, with them having been purified, he entered into the temple, declaring the fulfillment of the days of the purification, while the offering was offered up for each one of them. And when the 7 days were about to be completed, the Jews from Asia, having seen him in the temple, caused a tumult with all the multitude and put hands upon him. So Asia, that was up there in Turkey, Ephesus, and that area. There were Jews that had come down, and they knew who he was. They saw him in the temple, and they made an uproar. And they put their hands upon him, grabbed him, and it says, crying out while they held him, "Men, Israelites, help! This is the man teaching all everywhere against the people and the law and this place." This is the man who's doing all these things. And still, indeed, even Greeks he brings into the temple and makes this holy place unclean. Well, that started a real riot, because that's a real no-no in Jerusalem at the time, was to bring a Gentile into the temple. There were some Roman rulers that did go in and other ones that stayed out, and because of the sanctity of the place and what would the repercussions even today with the Temple Mount, with the Mosque of Omar on it. The Jews are almost, it's the opposite of here. They don't want riots to start, so they're very careful in controlling that area. For they were seeing Trophimus, the Ephesian, with him in that city, whom they thought that Paul brought in to the temple. This Trophimus was a traveling companion, and we saw him in the last chapter 20, and in 2 Timothy 4:20 mentions leaving him in Miletus sick. And the entire city was shaken indeed, and there became a stampede of people. And having taken hold of Paul, they drew him outside the temple and immediately locked the doors, these giant doors. They shut them, bolted him, and Paul's outside, and they were seeking to kill him. And seeking to kill him, a report ascended to the commander of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in a tumult. This commander and this cohort were stationed right there on the Temple Mount, in the fortress of Antonia, was named after Mark Antony. It was a large fortress. Not really sure exactly what it looked like, but it was part of the Temple Mount. So they didn't have to go far. They just come running out. And who immediately, having taken soldiers, stratiotas, strategy is a derivative, and centurions, ran down upon them. And the ones beholding the commander and the soldiers, they ceased beating Paul. So they're whacking on him, wailing on him, and yelling and screaming, and then the commander comes and everybody, they settle down. And having approached, the commander took hold of him and bid him to be tied with 2 chains and to inquire about who he may be and what he's doing. Must be doing something bad for all these people to get this excited. And others to another were yelling in the multitude. And not being able to know safely because of the tumult, he bid them to lead him unto the camp. That's probably the fortress of Antonia. And when he was at the stairs, and these stairs went up at the end to this fortress, and it happened that he was borne by the soldiers because of the force of the multitude. A vion, we have a biathlon, comes from that word, of the multitudes. So there were so many people. For the multitude of the people followed, crying out, "Take him away," just like they did with Jesus. You don't want to get rid of him. And being about to be brought into the camp, Paul says to the commander, "Is it allowed for me to speak to you?" And he said, "You know Greek?" So here Paul's speaking Greek, which he's writing all the letters to that he will be writing in Greek. Elenisti. Are you not then the Egyptian who before these days overthrew and led out into the wilderness the 4,000 men of the Sicarii? An Egyptian man, the Sicarii. Let's go down here to the internet, and here you can learn all about the Sicarii, who were basically assassins, carried knives, and anybody that was against what they believed, they would get behind them in a crowd and stab them and leave and fall back into the crowd. And they were later involved in killing Romans, and so this is what but he's referring to, that there was a 4,000 men that this person apparently took out into the wilderness. And Paul said, "Well, I am a man indeed. I am a Jew of Tarsus of Cilicia." Well, that's way up in Greece, not a native Jew. "A citizen of not an unmarked city, politis, politics, citizen. And I beseech you, commit it to my care to speak to the people." And he, having permitted, Paul, standing upon the stairs, waved his hand to the people. And with a great quietness having taken place, he called out in the Hebrew dialect, saying, the Hebrew, Jesus, when he spoke, it was in Aramaic, because they called it Hebrew, the name, but it was actually a form of Aramaic, because we know, like Talitha Kumi and different words that Jesus spoke that were not typical Hebrew sayings. He spoke this Aramaic, and that's probably what they're talking about here. I'm sure he knew the proper Hebrew also, that is Jesus. When he read the scroll of Isaiah to the synagogue, they had a Methergeman who was in between, who would translate this into the Aramaic to the people. So Jesus did speak Hebrew. The dialecto is not tongues here, but the Hebrew dialect. And he was saying, we'll go into what he was saying in Paul's defense in chapter 22, and I hope you'll join us. God bless.